Hello, today is Wednesday, October 29th, and welcome to episode 520 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vina, and I'm joined today by Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller and fellows Sarah Stewart and Jessica Jones. So today, or yesterday rather, was a big day for the U.S.-Japan relationship. President Trump met with Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, who happens to be a protege of the late Prime Minister Abe, who Donald Trump was quite close with. The two signed a deal for missiles and F-35 jets, as well as a memorandum of understanding for the construction of new ships, something that the United States needs a lot more of if we're going to compete against China. The two also inked an important deal on critical minerals and rare earth supply chains. Why does this matter? Because critical minerals go into just about everything, from cell phones to submarines. As you may recall, China has previously threatened to withhold critical minerals exports to the United States. China controls about 90% of the world's critical minerals supply, and this MOU states that the US and Japan will provide financial support for mining projects within 6 months. So I am really thrilled today to have Sarah join us on the pod because she is a true expert on the subject. So Sarah, starting with you, what are the United States' strategic goals here? Why is Japan, a particularly important partner for the United States in this space?
Yeah, thanks so much, Morgan. It's great to be here. So I think that there's three big things that I would take away following this deal. First, the U.S. already has a deal on critical minerals with Japan that was signed under the Biden administration. So this is building on that deal, and it's reaffirming the partnership between the two countries while President Trump is in Asia inking other deals. So I think while none of the deals mention China specifically, all of these deals, including the Japan deal, are intended to get to the heart of building diversified critical minerals supply chains outside the grasp of non-market economy manipulation. The second big takeaway that I would have is the minerals deal comes on the heels of a growing deep relationship with the US and Japan's new leader, starting with a framework agreement this past July and an adjacent investment agreement this week that includes Japan investing $3 billion in copper smelting in the United States. The third big takeaway is that Japan knows what it means to be cut off from rare earths from China, because this actually happened to them in 2010. Since then, Japan has diminished its reliance on China from a high of 90% to now 60% when it comes to critical minerals, but they're still heavily reliant on China at 60%. So it behooves Japan to also be looking for other sources so that it doesn't face another choke point. So those are the three high-level takeaways. What's in the deal? This is a non-binding deal, but it is a deal with a lot of terms of partnership. And I think that these two partners are serious about getting it done and implementing this. There's use of investment tools and financing mechanisms on a host of projects that are going to be completed in the near term. You've got an agreement to use trade measures under each party's domestic laws, stockpiling efforts. The parties are also going to work with the private sector, both upstream and downstream, to try and diversify this supply chain. The parties are going to work towards streamlining permitting, which is absolutely critical in order for projects to move forward. And a couple of other important things. They're going to review and deter asset sales in the interests of national security. So this is, of course, important because it gets to the heart of inbound and outbound review mechanisms like CFIUS. They also agreed to address non-market economy practices by establishing high standard marketplaces that reflect real costs. So while this doesn't go so far as to say that they're going to establish price floors or floors beneath which a product cannot be sold, this also means that they are going to be working together to combat the types of industrial practices that lead to the export of so much capacity at dumped and subsidized prices that other competitors can't compete in the market. So this is a very strong signal against non-market economy manipulation. Finally, there's a rapid response group that will be formed to identify priority minerals for action and challenges. One last point that I would mention here is that the US and China are also on the precipice of a deal right now. And part of that deal, without a doubt, will include whether or not China is willing to back away from very strict global measures on rare earths that it implemented back in October, but has since delayed further implementation and has said that possibly as part of this US China deal that it would delay delay implementation by 12 months. I want to give you just a couple of data points of why we should really analyze any deal between the US and China very carefully. Since China had implemented export control measures on certain rare earths in April, the US was very upset about this and asked China to back off, and a June agreement was reached. China agreed, and in its own words, the official position was that it would accelerate the review of export control license applications for these rare earth products. What we are seeing in the global trade data from China is that none of the rare earths, metals, and compounds that were subject to those export controls have flowed to the US since April, despite China's willingness and agreement in June that they would flow. Now, we are receiving some magnets, but that's the downstream product. The feedstock is not flowing. It is flowing, however, to Japan. So Japan has quite a bit to lose here. And so I think it's a very strong statement by the Japanese government that they're willing to go the course with the US in advance of the US and China making a deal.
Wow, Sarah, this is such important
And I'm
info.
like, we could just say that's a wrap.
Yeah, I know. Like, why do we need to continue with the pod? This is great, Sarah. Fantastic. That really is, some amazing analysis here. Thank you so much. So, Jess, shifting to the geopolitics of this deal, Sarah went into it a little bit, particularly with Japan and China and the United States. What do you think China makes of this deal? And can a similar deal be made with other countries?
I mean, China has spent a long time building itself up as a significant power in the global supply chains, in particular here as we talk about critical minerals and rare earths. So like any country, it doesn't want to see its position threatened. Obviously, it's going to see these deals that the Trump administration is going after and signing as targeting them, right? Building a bloc that decreases the US's reliance on China. But as Sarah pointed out, these are long-term plans. These aren't immediate impacts. And Sarah frightened me a little with this, cut down of rare earths since the June agreement. But Les's take on earlier this week was, both the U.S. and China are going to, walk back 100% tariffs, this complete restriction on the transactions on rare earths because of the, economic, damage that would be wreaked on both economies. So I think both countries are trying to position themselves as well as they can for the future, knowing that there is going to be, as much as we hate the term now, some kind of decoupling on some of these as we move forward. And I think, China probably sees President Trump's temperament as both kind of a challenge and as an opportunity. On the one hand, we see him as a little volatile. He kind of coercive transactions, but also showering favor. It looked like he had a great time in Japan with the new prime minister, right? Like the videos and photos, they look like they were having a ball.
They
and
had
so
to stop discussions because of the Dodgers. Just for what it's worth. They had to hit pause.
It's amazing. The putter, everything. Like it looked like they're having, a really great, symbol and sign for the future of the U.S.-Japan relationship. But that does raise, that's showering praise today. We don't know what might come in the months, in the future months. And so the question of durability when it comes to some of these deals is in question just because of his temperament. And these are long-term capital intensive deals. So, China might just be playing a weighted out little game and see actually what continues to be the priorities for the Trump administration. Like Sarah pointed out, President Trump is meeting Xi for their own discussions. And I wonder if Xi's kind of maybe going to play a little bit of the Putin playbook, which is let's continue negotiations. Let's continue maybe having some summits, just signaling a willingness to talk, but not really showing a lot of results, right? That seemed to work for Putin to date, where in October, the Ukraine conflict is still raging. That might be something they might try to do. And, to Sarah's point, there are probably countries that now we're talking about critical minerals and rare earths. They don't want to find themselves in the middle of a US-China strategic rivalry over this, right? They might try to position themselves as neutral as well and protect their own trade interests. It's amazing that Japan is coming out and signing a deal that indicates their willingness not to do that. And moving forward, there might be just less countries that are bigger, like low-hanging fruits when it comes to resource partners that we have left to sign deals with. Sarah's the expert, not me, but I can imagine there's only so many countries we can sign these huge landmark deals with. But it'll be interesting to see what Xi and Trump, what actually results both, to this week, and then actually how it continues forward and actually plays out in the future.
Yep. So, Martha, building off, sort of these last few questions here, this concept of friendshoring has become more prevalent in discussion and competition with China, and specifically in the saga over what to do about the critical mineral supply. Do you think that these could pose real national security benefits, or do you think that this is just more symbolic than anything and trying to and a messaging tool towards China?
I think it actually does both. This is like the we just had the Marine Corps Marathon here in DC, and this is like the start off to the marathon. But it does importantly send a signal to China that our allyship, or our partnership with Japan is very strong. That we will be coordinating and working together so that we can pool our resources and give China less leverage over us collectively. And so it's an important signal. It, I think, helps change the dynamics of these upcoming talks. It's a direct response to China's threats. And it sends a powerful message to industry and investors and other allied nations like Australia. I think the other thing is this is like essentially we all know that these critical minerals are important also to building our defense, but that's not going to be overnight. It is going to take probably a decade for us to work together with Japan and other nations to get us to a point where we are not dependent on China. And the scary thing is we need these minerals for F-35s and other military equipment that actually helps maintain our dominance militarily. So anyway, back, this is a short-term win, long-term gain, and it would be nice if we could have some sort of warp speed plan here to get it all done as quickly as possible.
Awesome. I'd like to point out, I was cheering on folks at the Marine Corps Marathon, as Martha pointed out, this weekend, and there was an amazing table that I was at mile 17, so we're far in, and it was called Bubbles for Your Struggles, and we had folks spraying bubbles and had champagne cups as people ran by, and maybe we consider that for our diplomacy. How do we give bubbles for some of our partners' struggles? I'm just saying, it was a hit table. People loved it, and it got people moving to. They had 10 more miles to go, and it was quite the motivator.
Yeah, Jess, not to go on a tangent here about bubbles for your struggles, but I remember when I ran the Cherry Blossom 10 miler too many years ago, there was literally a keg where people were doing keg stands at like miles 7 in Haynes Point. So yeah, shout out to all of the marathon finishers. Sarah Downs, looking at you, special shout out. So y'all, that's a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, October 31st for another spooky Halloween episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.